You did the shadow work. You cried, journaled, forgave, let go. You became honest with yourself about the parts you'd hidden away. But now, you can't stand being around people, even the ones you used to love. You smile, nod, play the part, but feel completely disconnected underneath. What if that disconnection isn't a flaw in your healing, but your first taste of truth? Let me tell you what's really happening. There's a strange phenomenon that happens after you've done the deep work on yourself. After you've stared into your shadow, recognized the masks you've worn, something unexpected occurs. You lose the ability to connect with many of the people around you. It's not that you've become cold or uncaring. It's that you've changed frequency. Carl Jung wrote, "Most of what we call personality is not the real self, but a mask we wear to meet the masks that others wear." When you stop wearing yours, you suddenly see everyone else's with painful clarity. You walk into a room and immediately want to leave. The conversations feel hollow. The laughter sounds forced. Your body refuses to cooperate with the old dance of nodding and smiling through interactions that feel like performance art. And here's what makes it even more confusing. These might be good people, people you genuinely care about, but something has shifted inside you, and you can't unsee what you now see. You're not becoming misanthropic. Your nervous system is simply choosing truth over comfort. And that choice is exhausting in ways you never expected. Pause for reflection. Take a moment to notice. When was the last time you felt truly seen by someone? Not liked, not appreciated, but actually seen. Let me paint you a picture. Jessica, 29, marketing manager, sits in her weekly team meeting. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting that familiar corporate pallor over everything. 6 months ago, she would have contributed enthusiastically to these discussions, laughed at her boss's mediocre jokes, volunteered for extra projects that weren't hers. She was the team player, the one everyone could count on, the one everyone liked. But Jessica has been doing shadow work, real work, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. She's been examining the parts of herself she's kept hidden for decades. Her anger at being overlooked, her resentment at constantly accommodating others, her bone-deep exhaustion from being the eternal yes person. She's been honest about her patterns of people-pleasing and the way she's betrayed herself in the name of being nice. Now, sitting in this meeting, she watches her colleagues perform the same elaborate dance she used to know by heart. The forced enthusiasm when someone presents an obviously flawed idea. The subtle competition disguised as collaboration. The way everyone nods earnestly when the boss speaks, even when what he's saying makes absolutely no sense from any practical standpoint. Jessica's body feels heavy. Not depressed heavy, truth heavy. Like she's been carrying something pretend for so long that setting it down has left her unsure how to hold herself. Her throat feels tight when she tries to contribute in the old way. Her energy drops when she attempts to laugh at jokes that aren't funny. Her entire nervous system seems to revolt against the performance. This is what Jung called the tight passage, that narrow door between who you were and who you're becoming. And Jessica is stuck in that doorway, feeling like she belongs nowhere. Too real for her old life, but not yet established in her new one. You know this feeling, don't you? This strange liminal space where you're too authentic for your previous connections, but haven't yet found your tribe of fellow truth-tellers. Your friends invite you out for drinks, and you say yes because you think you should want to go, because the old you would have wanted to go. But when you're there, listening to the familiar patterns of conversation, the same complaints about work, the same relationship dramas repeated without any genuine desire for change, the same surface-level sharing that schemes across the top of real human experience. You feel like you're watching a movie of your own life. You hear yourself responding appropriately, making the right sounds at the right moments, but it's like someone else is speaking through you. Your authentic self has retreated somewhere deep inside, waiting for safety that never comes. The truth is, you've developed what I call frequency sensitivity. You can now feel the energetic cost of pretending, and your body simply refuses to pay it anymore. Mid-video anchor. Here's something nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't make life easier. It makes life real. And real is often infinitely harder than fake, at least in the beginning. At work, you start noticing how much collective energy gets spent on managing personalities instead of doing meaningful work. How meetings could be emails, but they're really elaborate rituals of appearing important. How much time is wasted on politics and posturing while actual problems go unaddressed. You see the exhaustion in everyone's eyes, the way they've all agreed to pretend this is normal. This is just how things are. In friendships, you begin to see how much conversation revolves around complaining about the exact same things week after week, month after month, with no genuine interest in changing anything. The complaints have become comfort zones, ways of bonding that don't require actual vulnerability or growth. You realize that many of your connections were built on shared dysfunction rather than shared joy or curiosity. In family gatherings, you feel the weight of everyone playing their assigned roles while their authentic selves remain carefully hidden. The family comedian who's actually deeply depressed. The family caretaker who's drowning in resentment. The family rebel who's exhausted from always being the problem. Everyone performing their part in a play no one actually enjoys watching. Michael, 31, used to be the family mediator, the emotional sponge. Whenever his parents fell into their familiar patterns of passive-aggressive warfare, he'd step in with humor and distraction, absorbing their toxic energy so they could feel better without actually dealing with their issues. When his sister created drama, and she always created drama, he'd listen for hours, offering advice she'd never take, suggestions she'd never implement, emotional labor she'd never acknowledge. He was the family's unofficial therapist, their emotional dumping ground, their go-to person for managing everyone else's unprocessed feelings. And for years, this role gave him a sense of purpose, of being needed, of having value in the family system. After months of therapy and deep shadow work, Michael realized something that shattered his entire identity. He wasn't actually helping anyone. He was enabling their dysfunction while slowly drowning in their unprocessed emotions. He was preventing them from facing their own shadows by constantly managing the consequences of their unconscious behavior. Now, when his family tries to pull him into their familiar patterns of emotional chaos, Michael's body literally revolts. His throat constricts. His energy plummets. He feels nauseous. He physically cannot continue being their emotional caretaker without betraying everything he's learned about himself. But here's the cruel irony that so many people in your situation face. They interpret his new boundaries as him becoming cold or selfish or too good for them now. They can't see that he's actually becoming authentic for the first time in his adult life. They can't understand that his refusal to enable their dysfunction is actually the most loving thing he's ever done for them. This is the shadow work paradox that no one talks about. The healthier you become, the more isolated you may initially feel, because you're no longer willing to bond over shared wounds, to connect through mutual complaints, to perform intimacy instead of actually feeling it. Your old self knew exactly how to navigate relationships built on unconscious patterns, how to connect through shared trauma, mutual codependency, comfortable lies that no one questions. Your new self is learning an entirely different skill set, how to connect through presence, truth, genuine vulnerability, and conscious choice. These are completely different languages, and most people around you are still speaking the old dialect. And until you become fluent in this new way of being, until you find others who've made the same journey from unconscious to conscious relating, you're going to feel tired. Bone deep, soul level tired. Not because you're broken or doing something wrong, but because you're being born into a new way of existing in the world. Here's the moment of truth that most healing communities won't tell you. The recognition that changes everything. The fatigue you're feeling isn't a sign that something's wrong with your healing journey. It's not evidence that you've made a mistake or that you need to go back to your old ways of being. The exhaustion is actually a sign that something is finally profoundly right. You're not tired because you're still hurting. You're not tired because you haven't healed enough or done enough work or reached some imaginary finish line of self-actualization. You're tired because you've fundamentally changed, And your nervous system is now protecting this new version of you from situations that would require you to fragment yourself, to betray your own truth, to abandon the authentic self you've worked so hard to reclaim. Carl Jung wrote, "The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well." What he didn't mention, what perhaps he couldn't have known to mention, is that once you've squeezed through that door, once you've made that descent and return, you literally cannot fit back through it. You're too real now for many of the spaces you used to occupy. You're too integrated to fragment yourself for other people's comfort. You're too awake to pretend to be asleep. Let me tell you what's really happening in your body when you feel that familiar wave of exhaustion wash over you in certain social situations, around certain people, in certain environments that used to feel normal or even enjoyable. Your nervous system has undergone what I call an authenticity upgrade, where it used to scan primarily for physical danger, the ancient threats our ancestors faced. It now scans for what I call soul danger, situations where you would have to abandon yourself to fit in, interactions that would require you to put your mask back on, relationships that demand you become smaller, quieter, less real than you actually are. Emma, 28, describes this phenomenon with startling clarity. "It's like I developed an allergy to bullshit. I can literally feel my energy being sucked out of my body when someone starts complaining about their relationship for the 100th time without any genuine intention of changing anything. When people start gossiping or talking behind someone's back, I feel physically sick. When I'm in conversations where everyone's just trying to be right instead of trying to understand each other, my whole body wants to shut down." This isn't you becoming judgmental or developing some kind of superiority complex. This is your authentic self refusing to participate in the collective unconscious patterns that used to feel as natural as breathing. You used to be able to listen to your friend rehash the same relationship problems over and over because you were both bonding through shared dysfunction. The content didn't matter. What mattered was the familiar dance of complaint and sympathy, problem and advice, crisis and rescue. Now you can see that they're not actually seeking solutions or growth. They're seeking validation for staying exactly where they are. And your healed self simply cannot pretend that this dynamic is healthy or helpful anymore. You used to be able to laugh along with jokes that subtly put people down, that reinforced harmful stereotypes, that built connection through excluding others. Because everyone else was laughing, because it was just a joke, because you didn't want to be the person who made things awkward. Now you feel the violence in those moments. The way humor can be weaponized to maintain unconscious hierarchies and avoid real intimacy. Your body won't let you participate in that collective cruelty anymore. You used to be able to work jobs that felt completely meaningless because you had successfully numbed your connection to your deeper purpose, your authentic values, your soul's true calling. You could clock in, perform your role, collect your paycheck, and ignore the voice inside that whispered this wasn't what you came here to do. Now that numbness has worn off completely, and you can feel every minute you spend engaged in work that doesn't align with who you really are. Every meeting that could have been an email feels like a small death. Every task that serves no real purpose except maintaining systems that don't actually serve human well-being becomes unbearable. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, becoming undivided within yourself. But what he perhaps didn't emphasize enough is how profoundly lonely this process can be, especially in the beginning. How much grief comes with letting go of the false self that everyone knew and loved. How much courage it takes to exist as yourself when that self doesn't fit into the boxes that society provides. What part of yourself have you been silencing just to feel loved? And what would it cost you, really cost you, to let that part of yourself speak its truth? Here's the hardest truth of all, the one that cuts to the very core of what you're experiencing. You're not tired of other people. You're tired of the elaborate performance of connection that passes for relationship in our unconscious culture. You're tired of bonds built on mutual pretending. You're tired of giving your precious life energy to interactions that leave everyone feeling more empty, more isolated, more disconnected from their authentic selves than before. But here's what that soul-deep tiredness is really telling you. You've tasted something real, something genuine, something true, and you can no longer swallow the substitute. Your tolerance for surface-level connection has evaporated because you now know what depth feels like. Your patience for unconscious relating has disappeared because you've experienced the profound nourishment of conscious intimacy. The exhaustion isn't a sign that you're becoming antisocial or developing some kind of personality disorder. It's a sign that you're becoming exquisitely selective. Your energy is finite, perhaps the most finite resource you possess, and you're finally honoring that truth instead of squandering it on interactions that drain rather than sustain you. When you feel that familiar dread before social obligations that used to feel neutral or even enjoyable, when you notice yourself making excuses to avoid gatherings that everyone else seems to love, when you find yourself craving solitude more than company, this isn't depression talking. This isn't social anxiety or introversion or any pathology that needs to be fixed. This is your authentic self saying, I need space to exist without editing myself. I need relationships where I can be real instead of performing realness. I need connections that nourish my soul instead of depleting it. Jake, 33, captures this transformation perfectly. I used to think I was an extrovert because I could be on around people. I was good at reading rooms, adapting to whatever energy was needed, becoming whoever people wanted me to be. I thought that was a social skill, being able to blend in anywhere. But I realized I wasn't an extrovert. I was just a people pleaser with really good social camouflage. Now that I've stopped performing, now that I refuse to be anyone other than exactly who I am, I'm discovering I actually need way more alone time than I ever thought possible. It's not that I don't like people. I love people. But I can't pretend to be someone else anymore, and maintaining my authentic self in social situations requires enormous energy. Energy I'm finally willing to protect instead of waste. This is the crossroads where many people panic and desperately try to go back to their old ways of being. They miss the ease of unconscious connection, even if it was ultimately unfulfilling. They start to wonder if they've made a terrible mistake in pursuing authenticity, if maybe ignorance really was bliss, if perhaps they were happier when they didn't know what they now know. But you can't unknow what you know. You can't unfeel what you felt. You can't unsee what you've seen. You've crossed a threshold that only goes one way, and the only choice now is how consciously you'll navigate this new territory you find yourself in. So what do you do with this new frequency you're operating on? How do you exist authentically in a world that suddenly feels too small, too unconscious, too committed to maintaining illusions you can no longer pretend to believe in? The first step, and perhaps the most radical, is to stop apologizing for your energy. Stop trying to force yourself back into spaces that require you to shrink, to dim your light, to pretend you haven't grown beyond the container of your former life. Start trusting the profound intelligence of your fatigue instead of treating it like a problem to be solved. This doesn't mean you become a hermit who writes off everyone who hasn't done deep therapeutic work. It doesn't mean you develop a spiritual superiority complex or start looking down on people who are still unconscious. It means you become strategically, consciously selective about how you spend your most precious resource, your authentic presence. Lisa, 30, describes her transformation with beautiful clarity. I used to accept every social invitation because I thought I was supposed to want to go. I'd show up, put on my fun personality, the version of myself that everyone enjoyed being around. And I'd go home feeling completely drained and somehow more lonely than if I'd stayed home alone. Now I actually check in with myself first. Not just do I have time for this, but do I genuinely want to connect with these specific people? Will this interaction nourish me or deplete me? Am I being invited as my authentic self or as the version of myself that makes other people comfortable? It sounds selfish when I say it out loud, but it's actually made every single one of my relationships deeper and more honest. You start filtering your relationships through an entirely new lens. Not who needs me, but who actually sees me. Not who am I comfortable with, but who am I completely real with. Not who makes me feel good about myself, but who can handle my full humanity the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the questions and the certainty. And something absolutely beautiful starts to happen, though it may not feel beautiful at first. The superficial connections naturally begin to fall away, creating space for something infinitely more nourishing to emerge in their place. You discover that when you stop trying to be likable to everyone, you become magnetic to exactly the right people. When you stop editing yourself to fit into groups that were never truly your home, you start attracting others who not only appreciate your unedited truth, but have been hungry for exactly that kind of authentic connection. Your conversations change dramatically. Instead of bonding over complaints about things no one wants to change, you start bonding over curiosities about life's deeper mysteries. Instead of connecting through shared wounds that you pick at together, you start connecting through shared wonder at the complexity and beauty of human existence. Instead of talking about other people, their problems, their failures, their drama, you start talking about ideas, dreams, the fascinating process of becoming more conscious, more awake, more real. Marcus, 32, noticed this shift happening gradually. My entire friend group completely transformed after I did my shadow work. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. People just started fading from my life naturally. I stopped reaching out to maintain relationships that felt one-sided or draining, and they stopped reaching out to me. At first, I thought I was losing everyone who mattered. But then something incredible happened. I started attracting people who were on similar journeys of awakening. People who could talk about psychology and spirituality without getting weird about it. People who were interested in growth instead of just comfort. People who could sit in silence together without anyone feeling like they needed to fill the space with noise. The new connections I've made are so much deeper than anything I experienced before. We actually challenge each other to grow instead of enabling each other to stay stuck. We can hold space for each other's pain without trying to fix it or make it go away. We celebrate each other's evolution instead of feeling threatened by it. This is what Jung called the transcendent function. The ability to hold paradox, to be both individual and connected, to maintain your authentic self while still being capable of genuine intimacy and love. You learn to be honest without being harsh. You develop the skill of speaking truth in ways that invite rather than attack. You learn to have boundaries without building walls, to protect your energy without closing your heart. Most importantly, you learn to love people without trying to fix them, change them, or manage their emotional experience. You discover that real love sometimes means letting people have their own journey, even when you can see exactly where they're stuck and exactly what would help them move forward. Notice who in your life you can be completely yourself around. No performance, no editing, no carefully managed presentation. How does your body feel when you think of spending time with them? The fatigue that once felt so overwhelming begins to transform into something else entirely. Instead of feeling drained by all social interaction, you start feeling genuinely energized by authentic connection and only drained by performance-based relationships. You develop a sixth sense for the difference between the two. You realize you don't need to be understood by everyone. You don't need to be liked by every person you meet. You don't need to fit into every group or be included in every gathering. You just need to be deeply known by a few people who can handle your full truth. Quality over quantity becomes not just a concept you understand intellectually, but a lived reality you embody daily. Your relationship with solitude undergoes a complete metamorphosis. Instead of loneliness that you're trying to escape, you start experiencing solitude as sacred space. Time to remember who you are without other people's projections, expectations, and unconscious patterns overlaying your sense of self. Time alone becomes time to commune with your own soul, to listen to the voice that gets drowned out in the noise of collective unconsciousness, to rest in the profound peace of not having to be anyone other than exactly who you are in this moment. You develop what I call energetic boundaries, the ability to sense what serves your authentic self and what would require you to betray it. You learn to trust these boundaries even when they don't make logical sense to other people, even when following them means disappointing people you care about, even when honoring them feels selfish or antisocial. And slowly, Gradually, without effort or seeking, you find your tribe. Not through dating apps or social networking or trying to force connections that don't flow naturally. You find them by being so authentically yourself that the right people are naturally drawn to your frequency, like tuning forks resonating with the same note. These are the people who don't need you to be perfect or perpetually positive or constantly growing or always have your life together. They don't need you to have all the answers or to fix their problems or to be their therapist or their guru or their project. They can handle your full humanity, your shadows and your light, your questions and your insights, your evolving truth and your temporary confusion. With these people, conversation flows effortlessly from the surface to the depths and back again. Comfortable silence feels as nourishing as engaged dialogue. You can be sad without them trying to cheer you up, excited without them diminishing your joy, confused without them rushing to give you answers you haven't asked for. This is when you finally understand that the bone-deep fatigue wasn't a sign that something was wrong with you or your healing journey. It was your wise body protecting the precious seed of authenticity until it was strong enough to grow in the right soil, with the right people, under the right conditions. So here you are, standing in the aftermath of your own healing, wondering why you feel so tired of people when you thought becoming authentic would make everything easier. Let me give you the gift of a different perspective. You're not tired of people. You're tired of pretending. And that exhaustion isn't a problem to solve. It's a compass pointing you toward truth. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he didn't mention that this privilege comes with a cost. The loss of the false self that everyone knew and loved. The person you used to be could connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime. But those connections were built on a foundation of mutual pretending. The person you're becoming can only connect authentically, which means many of your old connections will naturally fall away. This isn't failure. This is evolution. You're not broken because you can no longer tolerate surface-level conversation. You're not antisocial because you need more solitude than before. You're not ungrateful because the life that used to satisfy you now feels too small. You're just becoming real in a world that often rewards the opposite. Final reflection. What if your tiredness isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong, but evidence that you're finally doing something right? The fatigue you feel around certain people isn't your body betraying you. It's your body protecting the tender new growth of your authentic self. Trust it. Honor it. Let it guide you toward the connections that will nourish rather than deplete you. You may have fewer friends now, but you'll have truer ones. You may attend fewer gatherings, but you'll be present for the ones that matter. You may speak less often, but when you do speak, it will be from a place of genuine truth rather than social obligation. This is not isolation. This is soul purification. You're not being harsh or judgmental. You're simply no longer willing to waste the precious truth you've worked so hard to uncover. And from this new foundation of authenticity, from this willingness to be real even when it's lonely, genuine connections will blossom. Not the quick, easy bonds of shared dysfunction, but the slow, deep roots of mutual recognition. You'll find your people, but first, you had to become brave enough to be your own person. The tiredness will pass. The pretending doesn't have to return. And in that space between who you were and who you're becoming, you'll discover something beautiful. The courage to exist as yourself, especially when no one else understands. Welcome to the other side of your shadow work. Welcome to the beginning of freedom. If this resonated with you, take a moment to reflect before moving on to the next thing. Your healing deserves to be witnessed, even if it's just by you.